In 2003, Ben Affleck starred in a science fiction thriller that came down to him having to decipher a code he sent to himself in 20 items inside an envelope. The final clue that he needed to figure out his future was on the outside of the envelope, which is what we have to do with the book of Ephesians this morning. God has hidden in Ephesians on the outside of the envelope the clues for our future. Now, what's interesting is I've got to get you excited about the last two verses of Ephesians that no one ever reads. And so in order to do that, I have to help you understand the power and the significance of the outside of the envelope. Now, if you happen to have a Duke of Wellington, the man who defeated Napoleon's envelope that was sent by him, you would find that that was worth $650 to $1,000. And so, whoa, this is significant. But if you happen to have the Benjamin Franklin 1-cent penny stamp that had actually been sent and canceled, it's worth $110,000 for that envelope, not even the letter on the inside. Now, if you happen to have collected the black envelope that was sent for 1 penny, it is now worth $2.5 million. And if you have a rare stamp that was sent called the upside down Jenny or the inverted Jenny, an airplane that was tipped over on the stamp, that's worth $2.7 million. And then if you happen to have one of these stamps, it's worth $3.8 million. Less than 30 of these exist. So make sure you check the outside of the envelope. The most expensive stamp that has ever been sent is now worth $9.8 million. It's hardly readable, but if you get it, hang on to it. We're going to take a look. Take a look here with me at Ephesians chapter 6, the outside of the envelope of the book of Ephesians. And we just read past it. Now let's just take a look at it. But that you also may know my circumstances, how I am doing, Tychicus, the beloved brother and faithful minister in the Lord, will make everything known to you. I have sent him to you with this very purpose, so that you may know about us and that he may comfort your hearts. Peace be to the brethren and love with faith from God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Grace be with all of those who love our Lord Jesus with an incorruptible love. Essentially, this little section is what he writes at the very end or the outside of the envelope. And there are some significant things that he tells us. And then in the last two verses, he gives us some codes that we are going to explore. So now as we jump in here, the first thing we have to talk about is Tychicus, who was the man who carried the letter of Ephesians. And Tychicus was the person who hand carries the letter of the Ephesians to that church. Interestingly enough, Tychicus, according to church history, becomes the bishop of one of the churches and the whole region of churches that Paul was not allowed to go into when he was making his way across to Asia Minor. And so what it tells me is that there are times when God says to you no because it's for someone else. And there are times when you would want to do this, but someone else is supposed to do that. And in this particular case, it was a person that Paul raised up and sent back into that region. And so have you ever wanted to do something and God wouldn't let you do it? Yeah. And that's what's happening to Tychicus. He doesn't know he's going to become the bishop of this critical area of Asia Minor. Now, with that, let's go to those critical two verses. And you'll see where it says, Ephesians 21:24, there are so much behind these words. He says, peace be to the brethren, and love with faith, and grace be with all of you. Each one of those things in the mind of the Apostle Paul is pregnant with all kinds of meaning and power, and he's trying to give you a code that says, please pay attention to this. Now, what we do is we just say, peace be to the brethren, love with faith, grace to everybody. And we don't see the power. When he says, peace be to the brethren, he means three things from Scripture. One is, stop being at war. Have you ever met someone at Thanksgiving who just takes everything wrong and is sarcastic and snarky, and they make war everywhere? Yeah, some people are pointing. Yeah. Our family used to have one of those guys. It was wonderful. And he, one of my brother-in-laws, and he just loved to say whatever would get everybody riled up. And it's like, if you're ever wondering why there seems to be drama all around you and it follows you, it might be you. That's what Paul's saying. Stop making war. The second thing he says is he's saying when he says peace is learn how to forgive. How many of you have ever had someone do something that they shouldn't have to you? Yeah, the rest of you are lying, okay? Understand, you have to learn how to forgive in a world in which people can make bad choices. And then he goes on to say, really what he's saying in the word peace is live in harmony. One of the things that we all have to do if we're going to get along with people is we have to learn how to dance with them. We have to learn how to adapt. And there are some people who are horrible dancers and you do not want to dance with them. And yet God is saying, peace be, you have to figure out, how do I adapt? Have you ever had to adapt to a horrible boss? Have you ever had to adapt to a person who's at work or in your neighborhood who's just irritating? And okay, how do I adapt? That's what he's saying. Just in that one phrase there, peace be with others. He's saying, stop making war and learn to forgive. Now, we're going to zoom in on some things here because I want to get to some interesting things that he's encoded in that word peace. And so the first zoom in is to look at the peace thing. The next zoom in is let's zoom in on learning to forgive. Now, what's interesting is Dr. Fred Luskin from the Stanford Institute of Forgiveness has told us for the first time in the research, we read that forgiveness has a 4-step process. There are 4 things you need to do in order to create a bitterness. There's 4 things you need to do in order to get ready to forgive. There's 4 things you need to do to forgive. And then there's 4 things you need to do to maintain your forgiveness. Now, what's interesting is that every single person I've ever met has had something bad or difficult or tragic happen to them that they need to forgive someone, themselves or God. And so when the Apostle Paul says, peace be to the brethren, he's saying, you have to learn how to forgive. Does this make sense? Some of you are like, no, I don't want to. I'm not doing it. I don't care how good this sermon is. I'm just not going to do it. Okay, now let's jump in here. Now, so we're going to zoom in a little bit more. So you ready for the next zoom in? We're going to zoom in on the second step, zooming in on how to get ready to forgive. What's fascinating is the science is telling us what the Bible is telling us. And that is, if you're going to forgive, you have to get ready to forgive. You can't just say, well, I don't feel like forgiving you, so I'm not going to do it. And an awful lot of people that I know are saying they just can't be forgiven. You don't know what they did. They're horrible. And they haven't gotten ready to forgive. They haven't done the steps that the scriptures tell us. So he tells us that you have to learn how to mourn your losses. He tells us you have to look at the impersonal rather than the personal. You have to control your emotional focus and then rewrite your grievance story. So are you ready to jump in? Let's zoom in on each one of those, because here's what I want you to do. I want you to be able to, at the end of today, go, I know how to make peace from my side with the people who have hurt me and wronged me. Because that's what Paul puts at the outside of the envelope. One of the last 3 things he says is learn how to be at peace with people who you don't like. Not that any of us have those. Okay, now, first, let's zoom in on learning to mourn. If you're going to get ready to forgive, the first thing you have to do, and I have to do, is we have to grieve our losses. We have to grieve the loss of a job. We have to grieve the loss of a loved one. We have to grieve the loss of a relationship. We have to grieve the loss that we didn't get the job that we wanted, or all those different kinds of things. Now, Americans have 2 things that are true of us by a culture. We do not like pain, so we deny we're feeling pain, or we'll take a pill because we don't want to feel pain. And yet what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, who learn how to grieve, for they shall be comforted. Many of us in this room today, I'm not hurting. I don't have any problems. And yet we have a hairball sitting in our stomachs that we need, like a cat, to hack up. We need to get it out. We need to begin. If we're going to make peace with God, if we're going to make peace with ourselves, if we're going to make peace with someone else, as Paul tells us, one of the things we have to do is learn to mourn. number of years ago, I had the privilege of leaving a job I didn't want to leave, if you've ever had that opportunity. And so the week after that, I was out at Folsom Lake, and I was in this grove of trees, and as I was walking along, I just stopped, and I could feel this, and it just started coming out. And I was just crying and bawling, and a grown man who was just, you've got to do that. You've got to find out, how do I grieve my losses? I was talking with someone just this last week, and I was teaching them how to start grieving the loss of what they wanted their parents to be, but they weren't. I've worked with countless numbers of people who've been in alcohol recovery, drug recovery, and one of the things that my friends who are experts in this tell me is, if you are addicted to something, whether it's cheesecake, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's gambling, there is a wound you're hiding from, because your addiction is how you cover up the pain of that wound. And so if we're going to have peace, we have to learn how to stop denying, and we have to say, that really hurt, that was really difficult. A few years ago when my father passed, I just needed to, for about 2 weeks, just to be very, very down, very, very discouraged, very just crying and working through that. And when you lose someone, it's okay. When you lose something that was precious to you, you have to do that. So we need to grieve our losses. We need to process our pain with a safe, confidential person. This might be a counselor. It might be a friend. It has to be a safe person who will listen with intensity. That does not necessarily mean your spouse is a safe person, because they may not care anymore, okay? And then we need to get the pain and hurt events outside of our head and into the real world. We have to bring it out into the real world instead of just in our heads. And I can remember when my daughter, who was in 8th grade at the time, was going with a young boy in middle school, and so they were having this little puppy love thing, and I wanted to tell her, it's going to be over really quick, but my mom said, don't tell her that, just let her enjoy this. And so that went along 2 or 3 weeks, and they were excited, and then I heard that the young man broke up with her, and so, in middle school, and so she was on her bed on a Friday afternoon after school, and I came into the room, and she said, Daddy, why did he have to do that? It's so horrible. And I said, honey, I'm so sorry. And I hold her, and I'm just hugging her, and she's crying. And I said, this isn't good. And she said, Daddy, I don't want to do anything this whole weekend except eat ice cream and watch Gilmore Girls. And so she wanted to salve her pain with food, especially ice cream, and with videos. And I said, I won't let you do either one of those until you write a letter to this young man about everything you feel that you won't send. And she just looked at me, and her eyes, which were really big, she got really narrow, and she said, oh, I can write that letter. And so she sat up and got her little laptop, and she pounded out 4 pages of venom to get it out. And I said, this is good, don't send it. Does this make sense? We need to talk and pray. Some of you right now, you cannot forgive, you cannot move on from the job you lost, from the relationship that's over, because you haven't learned to do what Jesus said and mourn. That's one of the first steps to getting ready to forgive. Next, now let's zoom in on going from the personal. One of the things that we do when we get bitter is we take everything too personally. We just go way too personal. I had to laugh. I was driving here last night, and I'm driving along. Have you ever been in one of those situations where you hit every light, and it's like you're trying to make progress, and then you're coming on, and you can begin to think that someone is out for you. You can begin to take it way too personal. They meant that. They meant that light to change so that I couldn't get through. Now, that's a facetious example, but many of us, if we lose a job, we take it you hate me. And it may have been somewhat personal, but if you're going to learn to forgive, if you're going to get ready to forgive, you have to start leaning into the impersonal side. This happens to everybody. Unfortunately, other husbands or wives have divorced their spouses. This other people have lost their children. And if you're going to get out of this bitterness place, you've got to change into, let's look at it impersonally. It's a part of the sludge of the universe. Jesus does this while he's hanging on the cross. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because he's saying, they don't even realize they're killing the Son of God. If they knew, they wouldn't do it. And so, some of us, we have convinced ourselves that whatever happened to us was meant against us, so we're mad at God. And we've taken it way too personally. I remember one man that I was working with who was not a Christian, and he didn't come to our church, but his wife, who had passed away, was a lovely Christian. And so I met this guy and tried to talk to him, trying to witness to him, and he was so mad. He said, I'm never coming to church. I'm never believing in God. My wife was the most amazing person, and God didn't heal her. And this guy was cantankerous and ornery and irascible, and he was very difficult to be with. And I wanted to say, did you ever think that God was blessing your wife by getting her away from you? But I didn't say that. And what happens is that he refused to take the death of his wife as anything but personal against him. If there was a loving God, he would have given me more years with this woman. Does this make sense? And we can all do that. We can take it personally when it's impersonal. It's a part of the, just time for them to go home. It's time for this person to move on, okay? Now, one of the things that you have to ask is, how can God use this for good in my life? God, I know that it's just a part of the sinful world we live in, that these kinds of things happen. How can you use this? I was working with a young lady who was working for a boss. She'd only worked for her dad, and then her dad unfortunately passed away, and she was struggling with that, but she went to work for another lady. And in the process, she said, my new boss is horrible. She's just horrible, and she does this, and she doesn't do that, and she does this, my dad never used to do that. And I sat down and I said, I want you to write out all the bad things that your new boss does, and then I want you to write all of the ways that you could think that God might use this in your life. And what was interesting was she wrote 50 ways that the boss was horrible, and she wrote 50 ways that God might use it, and it made no difference in her life. So I said, I want 50 more ways that God could use it. And when she got to double the good things God could do, then it made a difference. Does that make sense? It wasn't enough to just say, this cancels out this. She had to say, God, you could also do this, and you could also do this. She wrote 100 ways that God could use it against the 50 ways she thought it was negative. And then God released her to say, okay, you're thinking impersonally. The Apostle James says the same thing in James chapter 1. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, various tests, various horrible things. And we go, I don't want to. I want to hate them. You guys don't want to do that, though, right? And if we're going to learn to forgive, we're going to get ready to forgive, we're going to ready to have peace, we're going to have to say, God, could you show me how this might be good in my life? It was horrible, it was bad, it was difficult, but how could you turn it into good? Okay? Now, you guys are not listening fast enough, so let's zoom on. Okay. We're going to zoom into the whole third piece here. If this is getting ready to forgive, you have to zoom in on your emotional focus. When we have something bad happen to us, we have a natural reaction of anger, hatred, irritation, frustration. It's just natural. Now, what we don't realize is that we want to hate people. We want to, I'm very practiced at that, okay? And God had to really take a long time to get that out of me. And this was a major, major thing. What many people don't realize is that your emotions are like a massive series of TV screens. And you have all kinds of emotions, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. Some of you and some of us enjoy watching the Betrayal Channel because we love to watch the Horror Channel, the Revenge Channel. We love to watch the Irritated Channel, the Snarky Channel. We love to watch all these, okay? And here's the deal. You and I can choose what channel we watch. Years ago, when I had a person betray me and deeply hurt me, I watched the movie, The Count of Monte Cristo, which is a betrayal movie, 1,000 times. It was my favorite movie because it reflected now what I was reinforcing. And what God wanted me to watch was the Beauty Channel, the Yosemite Channel, the Joy Channel. And I enjoyed just betrayal and revenge. And if you get into that, what the Apostle Paul tries to help us understand in other places, and that's Philippians chapter 4, he says, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good repute, whatsoever things are pure, think on these things. You can control it, but I would rather watch the Revenge Channel. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, it says, give thanks for all things. It says, be thankful. You can focus your emotions. Have you ever been at home and your spouse does something that's irritating and this emotion comes within you and you'd like to be irritated at them? And you have a choice. Do I stay irritated at them and make the next 3 weeks a mess? Or do I just say, I guess we got to move on, and you switch to something else. Let's make fun today. Let's move forward today. Does this make sense? Like, I had the privilege of holding my grandson and babysitting him for the first time this last weekend. And so he's here, and you're bouncing him, and this is the Joy Channel. And then you forget that babies, when they're bounced, they release stuff. And so I forgot to put the burp cloth on, so, but you know what? When you have your first grandchild, it doesn't matter. These clothes can get washed. And yet many times we don't do that with our spouse. We don't do that with our grown children. We just need to say, bring it on, bring it on. Now, find the positive and focus there. If we're going to get ready to forgive, you and I have to learn how to control our emotional channel. Can we switch to thinking of good things and lovely things? That's why the Apostle Paul was 2,000 years ahead of his time, 2,000 years ahead of the science that says you can control this. You can choose to make your thoughts here and there. My nephew and his wife, they came up to visit us, and they had stopped by Yosemite. And when you ask a person who's visited Yosemite to tell you what Yosemite was like, they always tell the same story. I was going through the tunnel, and then I came out, and I had to stop, and we had to, And everybody's gone to Yosemite, unless you come the back way. You're just mesmerized. I've been there hundreds of times, and I always have to stop, and I always have to worship God because it's so incredibly beautiful. You have to have that channel in your head. You have to be able to go there. Because I don't know whether you've noticed it, but some people in Santa Rosa drive crazy. Some people do not know that you are on the road. I keep thinking that they should recognize Gil's on the road. I'll pull over to the right and let him by. They don't. And so I have to have the emotional control to switch from the Revenge Channel to the Joy Channel. I'm driving along. I'm thinking of lovely things. I will let that idiot go crash into someone else rather than me. Am I making sense here? Understand, we cannot be at peace with other people if we haven't learned to mourn our real losses. If we haven't learned how to say, that felt personal, but there must be an impersonal element I can push into. I have to grab a hold of my emotional control in order to switch it to a different channel. Now, there are times when you have the loss of a loved one and you're mourning, you have to let that grief, that anger, that frustration go through. Does this make sense? And some of you right now are going through some of those things. And then when it's over, I have a friend of mine who's unfortunately had a very, very difficult thing in which her husband's divorced her, and it's just very, very, very tragic, divorcing her. And she said, do I have to learn how to control my emotions yet? And I said, no, you're still in grieving. But about February, I'm going to need you to switch over. And you've got to understand, how do I get control again so that my life is not them and what they did to me. Does this make sense? Now, the final one is, well, the next one I should say, because I have 4, A, B, and C. So you have to rewrite your grievance story. All of us tell a story. Let me tell you what happened to me. And then you pick the parts that prove your case. And if you're going to get ready to forgive, you have to rewrite the story from a victim story to a hero story. Let me tell you how I overcame the idiot I used to work for. Let me tell you how, and you begin to talk about how God and you are rebuilding your life. You are moving forward instead of, I'm stuck. I could have been the center fielder for the San Francisco Giants, but this guy cut me off and he wouldn't let me do this, and all of those kinds of things. Now, one of the most important things that many people don't get is when you have been hurt, when you have been wounded, when you have developed the beginnings of bitterness, you want payback. You want revenge. And one of the things that God says is you can't handle it. You can't handle vengeance. So what God says is, hire me as your hitman. That's my version of Romans chapter 12. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. Oh, I delegated that to God. Like I've said to my wife, I've said to the kids, we watch too many of those Dateline shows or whatever else, and I've said, if any of you ever get murdered, I'm not going to the trial because it will make me too angry. I've delegated it to the police, to God. And now I have to say that some of my best prayers have been when I delegate it to God. God, this is who hurt me. This is where they live. If you would like some suggestions as to what I think you should do to them, I'm more than happy to give you the suggestion. Well, I'll just give them to you right now anyway. And so then I have a wonderful time of prayer, and I'm delegating it, I'm hiring him, and then I say, God, if you know that they need a blessing instead of a slap upside the head like I think, then you do whatever you have to do. We can't handle the bitterness that many of us are carrying. We just can't. We've got to get it out to God. We've got to give it away to him so that we can then get on to forgiveness. Because bitterness is like a cancer that will eat our life alive. It will suck everything out of you, and you will live a limited life because my life could have been good, but they fired me. My life could have been good, but this person divorced me. My life could have been good, but they broke up with me. Or whatever it is that is the loss. Now, one of the things that we learn both from the scriptures and from science is that all bitterness at its core is unrealistic expectations. Did you realize, and maybe this is not true here in Santa Rosa, that you may have unrealistic expectations of your spouse to read your mind without saying something? My wife says, I can't read your mind. You got to tell me what it is. And so I know that every time I get angry, I have an unrealistic expectation that something should have happened the way I wanted. I was driving to the airport years ago, getting ready to go on a flight. I was going to go, I think, up to Canada and work with some pastors up there, so I had to be on time. So I get there, and I thought, this is perfect. I'm coming in, and the bus is coming in, and it's coming in just right. I'm going to get out of my car. I'm going to get on the bus. I'm going to get there. And so I get into the back seat, and I have one of those garment bags, that has the long strap. And so I start getting this stuff out, and one of the straps had wrapped around the headrest. And the bus is coming, and the bus is here, and I can't get it. So I'm having an argument with the garment bag. And then, and I realize I'm getting angry. What is my unrealistic expectation? My unrealistic expectation is that everything would work exactly the way I want all the time. And I just had to laugh, and I say, you're an idiot. The airport is not here for you. And so the bus went by, and I had to walk with my garment bag all the way to the terminal, 250 steps or whatever it was. When we get angry, when we are bitter, there is an unrealistic expectation growing in our lives. Find it and then laugh about it and go, yeah, that's pretty dumb. Now, it's pretty dumb. Now, one of the things that when I drive, I have to remind myself that I'm a Christian, but I'm driving, and I don't know about you, I know I know that the absolute best place for anybody who's behind a car is when they're over here or over here. Well, that happens to be the blind spot for the car that's over there. And have you ever been driving along and then you look in your mirror, there's nobody, you look behind you, and so you want to go over and then there's someone there? There are times when I get upset. What are you doing in my blind spot? Get out of my blind spot. That's an unrealistic expectation that everyone would recognize. I shouldn't be in Gil's blind spot. And my wife looks at me like, understand that if we're going to get ready to forgive, we have to realize I have an unrealistic expectation. How many of you have ever seen a 6-year-old child perfectly behave themselves for a whole week? Yeah. Oh, only the 6-year-old. This is you. This is wonderful. I love it. I love it. Okay. We have the perfect child. This is great. I love it. And is mom agreeing? Yeah, she's trying to. Yes. Now, understand, it is unrealistic to expect that a 6-year-old or a 70-year-old is going to behave all the time. And so we have to then embrace the fact that they will do things that we didn't plan. And then, again, let me just say this. We want to write a hero story. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers because he was just too proud and arrogant. And they just wanted to get back at him, and they were going to kill him, but they said, well, we'll hold off. They sold him into slavery. And it took him somewhere between 13 to 25 years for him to be able to realize, you meant it for evil. God meant it for good. And he, in that process, went through the 4 things that we're talking about of, okay, I got to mourn my losses. I'm a slave now. I've got to work through making it impersonal. God was up to something beyond what I thought. I've got to change the channel, and God's given me a wife and a family and all these things. And when he finally met his brothers again, he could say, after he tested them, you meant it for evil. God meant it for good. Some of you with a relative, with a loved one, with a mom or dad, a boyfriend, a boss, you want to be going towards, how can I make this a part of my hero story instead of the dead end of my life? How do I get past this? And it needs to become the hero story. Forgiveness will restore your hero journey because this incident is only a part of your story, not the end of the story. Now, I am right now so excited about writing a book about bitterness, about the stuff we're talking about. And I'm hoping we're going to call, this is a working title, The Bitterness Cure, because we cannot handle being bitter. We want to figure out, how do we use the grace of God to stop telling a victim story? If one of the first things you tell people when they ask you, tell me about yourself, is your victim story, you're in a bitterness track. But if you're telling them a hero story, let me tell you about some of the things that God and I have been able to overcome as we move through life. The second is, what are the spiritual exercises that I can practice to keep the past from controlling me? Right now, your past is trying to reach out and grab you and keep you stuck in the past. You know, your best year was 3rd grade, and you're still stuck there. How do I begin to live a hero story of how I overcame what happened to me? I have been so encouraged listening to people who've been burned in fires, who were born without arms and legs, tell stories about how God is using them and how God is moving forward through them. And I remember one guy, thousands of people would come here and give his testimony. He has no arms and legs. And he says, I'm amazed that some of you want to be me, because I don't want to be me. But God has overcome the deformities and difficulties that I was born with to give me a life I don't deserve. And that's what God wants to do for every one of us. Understand, all of this is written in that little phrase, peace be with you. What the Apostle Paul is saying, don't miss the fact that you and God together can find peace, even with idiots all around you. Now, let's talk about action steps. Band's going to come out, and we're going to get ready to sing. But let's just apply this. I don't believe we should have a sermon we don't apply. So how many of you really are willing to accept God's help to make peace with others? How many of you say, okay, I'm willing. Okay, good. Hey, we're making some progress, Steve. This is good. Okay. How many of you realize that you are the person that may be causing some war with another person? Okay? Very good. Your snarkiness, I love that. This is good. Okay? Now, let's go right down through the 4 steps of getting ready to forgive, because I believe one of these is for you this week. Okay? How many of you realize you need to mourn your losses? You need to just mourn some of the grief, the pain. Good. This is so important. How many of you realize you need to stop seeing this so personally, and you need to lean into how could God use this, the impersonal side? How many of you would say that? Okay, good. How many of you realize that you've been stuck on the betrayal channel and you need to control your emotional focus to something else? Yes, amen. This is so good. Revival is breaking out over here, Steve. This is not quite as exciting as a part. Okay, okay, look, we got revival right here. This is good. Okay, now, how many of you realize that you need to rewrite your grievance story as a hero story? How you're overcoming what happened to you instead of how you're stuck with what happened to you. Okay, good. God has blessed us with the energy and the grace that he gives us through Jesus Christ. And if you are not a Christian, I would invite you to become a Christian, to just say, yes, Jesus, I want in on this. I want energy to be able to forgive. I want to be able to get past the horrible things that happened to me as a young person or in my divorce or whatever it was. We are giving people the chance to get baptized today. And interestingly enough, we have one person who signed up for second service, but no one signed up for first service. So some of you may be saying, I want Jesus, I'm all in. We're ready. You could come and you could get baptized and you could say, Lord Jesus, I want to be a Christian. So we're going to have the band play, and if anybody wants to come up, you can go right through those doors. We would be more than happy to help you make a decision for Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening, and I've been having way too much fun, and it's time for Israel to go forward. Okay.